I had a police officer make a comment about my libertarianism last week, just before he arrested me. My second arrest in 2 weeks. A justice of the Supreme Court in the late 1960s said, "When you are engaged in civil disobedience, the only law that you should be breaking is the one that you need to have changed to put it into the system so that it can get a constitutional challenge." Do you understand what that means? Supreme Court justice says, you break this one so that you can get the courts to repeal it. Do you guys think that's ever worked before? Yes. How many of you guys have ever heard this idea that you are protected and they are going to read you your Miranda rights? Have you ever heard that? Yes. So who's Miranda? He was a guy who took a case to the Supreme Court as to whether or not he knew his rights. And that decision has changed the life of every American who's at risk of being arrested and knowing what they can and can't do. When arrested the other day, they told me that I could call my lawyer. In fact, not one phone call, but as often as I wanted. His name is Seth Hipple. He's really cool. This is not level, I apologize. His name is Seth Hipple, and I love his business card. It's a bumper sticker. It said, "I do not consent to searches under Article 13 of the New Hampshire Constitution. All questions will be answered by my attorney, Seth Hipple, and New Hampshire Legal Services, and the 800 number, so that if the police officer has any questions, it's all right there." I love working with a constitutional lawyer. I never actually thought I'd be in this place. But a strange thing happened to me. My first term in the State House, I sat next to this lady, wonderful older lady, and we were sitting there chatting one day. We were talking about the fact that, exchanging family information and such. And she was telling me she had a fire at her house, and her 2 dogs died. And I was very sad. And she said their names were Dagny and Ragnar. And I said, "Who?" And she said, "What?" She said, "You've never heard of Atlas Shrugged?" And I'm like, "No." And we had this discussion about the fact it was coming out in a movie. And she said I should read the book, 1,200 pages. And I was in the middle of a legislative session. We get about 4,000 pages in a legislative session to read. It did not make my list. But I did go see the movie Atlas Shrugged in the movie theater. And I hated it. It was horrible, and I didn't get it. You know why? I couldn't connect with any of the characters. They all sucked. So I went home, and I'm not kidding, I bought the Cliff Notes that night online, and I read them. And I went back to see the movie again the next day, and I still didn't get it. So me and my friend Andrew Manuson and his wife went out the next day after that, and we watched it again, and then I got it. And I realized I was inspired. But I didn't really get inspired until Atlas Shrugged Part 2, and I'm watching the trial of Hank Rearden. And he's sitting there, and he says, "I don't recognize the jurisdiction of this court. I don't recognize the law, and I don't recognize the good of others as being justification for taking my property." Wow. That's pretty cool. And then you sort of listen to what he says in the whole speech. And by the way, David Kelly and the Atlas Society have an incredible mini documentary on this topic on YouTube. You should check it out. We'll put a link in the video. But it's amazing. David Kelly is talking about the fact that this guy is going to end up with judicial problems because he didn't follow the rules. And then I ended up with a really great quote. I'm going to read this to you from Atlas Shrugged. Dr. Ferris says, "Do you really think we want those laws observed? We want them to be broken. You better get it straight. It's not a bunch of Boy Scouts you're up against. We're after power, and we mean it. There is no way to rule an innocent man. The only power any government has is the power to crack down on criminals." Well, when there aren't enough criminals, we'll make more. One declares so many things a crime that it becomes impossible for men to live without breaking laws. Who wants a nation of law-abiding citizens? What's there in it for anyone? But just pass a bill, some kind of law, that can neither be objectively observed or, nor enforced or interpreted. And you create a nation of lawbreakers. And then you can cash in on their guilt. Mr. Reardon, that is the game. And once you understand it, you'll be much easier to deal with. Think about it. This was before Miranda. I think this was even before Rosa Parks. You know who she is, right? She's a young lady or older lady who didn't go to the back of the bus. What many of you may not know about Rosa Parks is she was chosen. How many of you guys know she was chosen and this was staged? Why? The answer is simple. You need somebody who can actually stand up to the scrutiny and say it's right or wrong. 14 years in a row in New Hampshire, there has been a challenge to the car inspection regulations, which are about the tightest and most difficult in the nation. Did you guys know that? Yeah, we actually have the worst. 30 states have none at all.
I was arrested for that.
You were? Funny that. Last year when I was at the Atlas Summit, literally the day that I gave my talk a year ago, some of you will remember I was really, really angry because I got stopped in front of the place. They wrote me a ticket. Irony, this week, or last week actually, I got arrested for that very ticket. They put me in a pair of these twice. They denied me my liberty. And do you know what I had done to do? You know what I had done to make that happen? I failed to consent to a victimless crime. And I had made an argument that says this crime is only enforced against the citizens of New Hampshire. It is only so that they can raise $13 million worth of annual revenue, so that they can actually make the car dealers and auto industry in New Hampshire, which employs 14,000 people, force people in to get car repairs or look at buying a new car every single year. The only people, I have the Senate recordings if anyone's interested. If you are, we'll put a link in the video. I will also email you a link. We have the Senate recordings from New Hampshire. This bill passed in the House to fix car inspections, goes to the Senate. One of the #1 donors to the Senate candidates, by the way, is the New Hampshire Auto Dealers Association. You can look that up. It's true. The #1 question on their questionnaire is, do you believe in repealing car inspections? Funny that. It's a little crony, but don't take my word for it. This article's all over the internet. But the Senate defeats it. This year, the year before that, they don't want to touch it. Because the auto dealers, through different mechanisms, contribute a lot of money. So we're asking the question, who is the victim? I say, if my car was registered in Massachusetts, New Hampshire doesn't enforce their laws. You know how I know that? I got a police officer on the stand. I've got a CD. It's an hour long, where I challenged him. I said, do you know the law? Have you actually read this law? And she said, at some point. I said, are you aware of the fact that it changed this year in June? The same month that you stopped me, it changed. Do you know what the change is? No. Then how can you charge me with a crime if you don't know the law? So I objected. I said to the judge, motion to dismiss. Why? Well, because they don't know what they're charging me with. Motion denied. For an hour, I went on asking for reason after reason to dismiss. Now, I knew going in that they were not going to dismiss this case for any reason. I was very thankful for that. I'd spent half an hour talking to the prosecutor and made it clear that my goal was to go to the Supreme Court to challenge the constitutionality of this law and get it removed so that no one else ends up in handcuffs over it. Because it happens. They tow your car and do all kinds of nasty stuff. Oh, and by the way, one of the ways in which your car can fail a car inspection is because you have a check engine light that is on because you didn't properly close your gas cap at some point since the last time that you reset your car. Did you guys know that could happen? An ODBI violation of some sort, whether it's a misfire in your spark plugs, or any other thing that turns that light on until it's turned off by somebody who actually has the proper equipment, by the way. We'll get into the cronyism of that later. It doesn't work. Unless you go to somebody and pay them to be part of who is part of the crony establishment, you're stuck. New Hampshire actually makes it worse. My wife should have been here with a stack of paper. Did you bring the stack of paper for me? Okay, hold on, let's see. Oh, is it on my laptop? No, okay. I actually, after 2 arrests in the last 2 weeks, went and got my car inspected. I don't need the hassle. Now that I have the opportunity to go out and make the complete argument, we can then go comply with the law and still get the challenge. Do you get it? It's amazing. Most people don't understand that a law passed by the legislature is presumed constitutional until challenged before the Supreme Court. Legislators, only supposed to pass things that are constitutional. Who gets to decide? It's only the Supreme Court. Everything else is subjective. The New Hampshire legislature is 400 members in the House side. It is 24 members in the Senate. And they get to decide what they think on any particular day or year is constitutional. And the only way to overturn it is to spend around $27,000 to get a case before the New Hampshire Supreme Court. Now I have a question for you. What kind of investment is it to skip paying a $40 charge to have to spend $27,000? Does that make sense to anyone in this room? If it doesn't make sense to you, you're not paying attention. Which is more important, money or freedom? Freedom. So somebody says. What we need are people who are willing and able to make the challenge. Article 10 of the New Hampshire Constitution says that when all methods of redress are exhausted, the government is corrupt and is no longer protecting liberty, it needs to be changed or replaced. It's one of the most interesting and unique lines in any constitution in the United States. Did you guys know that? The problem is, according to the Supreme Court, which has evaluated this on numerous occasions, they say that you have to actually try through all of the branches of government to fix it first. Nobody ever has. I'm one of these annoying people in New Hampshire. Because I've read that Supreme Court case, and I've made the argument in front of the New Hampshire House of Representatives. I have made it in front of the state Senate, and I have made it to the Deputy Director of the Department of Motor Vehicles. He's the administrative department, by the way. Guess what that is? That's 2 out of 3, baby. 2 out of 3. And when they deny me in court, it's 3 out of 3. And then we can have an interesting discussion with the U.S. Supreme Court as to whether or not the government of New Hampshire has become invalidated by its own constitution. And anybody who thinks that I won't go that far if I can get the money hasn't met me before. People who have will tell you that I am just that tenacious. Why? Because it matters. I've stood on the House floor, I've stood in committees, and I've told the citizens that I represented, you will be protected from an oppressive government. Because our founders in this state didn't put the Bill of Rights at the end. In New Hampshire, they put it first. Article 1 of the New Hampshire Constitution says that all government is by consent. Pretty neat, huh? Article 2 says that we as a state and as a society have natural rights. I'm sorry, that's Article 3. Article 2 says something about guns.
No, you're right.
Was it?
Yeah, natural rights is Article 2. Then they created 2A.
Right, 2A is guns. Right, sorry. I knew that 2A was guns. In New Hampshire, in case you guys don't know it, or your guests, New Hampshire is an open carry state. Do you know what that means? It means if you can see it, I can carry it. Check, right here. Did you know that? Walk in anywhere you want. The people at a bank get really upset. Every once in a while, there's somebody who walks into Walmart, somebody screams gun, somebody gets tackled. But you can have it, don't ever pull it. If you pull it, you could end up like a guy named Ward Bird, Ward Bird stood on his porch 3 days after getting out of the hospital with open heart surgery, told somebody they were trespassing and to get off his yard. When he removed his firearm from its holster, he was arrested, charged with criminal threatening. The way that it all ended up, because of the requirements in the law for mandatory sentencing, he ended up in jail until he was pardoned by the governor and executive council. The judge said, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do." The law is constructed in a way that any time, day or night, they want you, they'll get you. This is going to sound a little strange, and I may sound paranoid, right? My daughter, who's on her way here, I wanted her to be up on the stage when I told this story, but she's not here, locked the keys in the car first week of having a new driver's license. Okay, we all make that mistake, right? So what do? Well, she knows you can call the police and they'll open your car for you. You guys know that, right? So on Sunday morning, they came down. Well, I was sleeping late. They opened the car, the whole bit. As they were driving out of my driveway, they stopped, according to my daughter. They waited. They got out of the car. They came up and knocked on my door and asked if I was home. I came down to the door, and they said, "Mr. Lambert, you're under arrest." That was my first arrest. Not because I was out doing anything, but because they were there, and they checked before they left my house, just like they checked you all the time. My second arrest, interestingly enough, was because I was driving down the street, and I had, some of you might have heard of the Free State Project, maybe not. I have Free State Project logos on the back of my car. Why? Because it makes me a target, and I like it. No, I understand the rules. If you're going to protest, you have to understand the rules of the game. The rules of the game are this. And I sent an email to our police chief the other day. We had this interesting sort of back and forth about it. I said, according to the Supreme Court justice, whose name is Justice Fortes, who actually wrote a book and a paper on this very topic, he said, civil disobedience has clearly recognizable tests. They are, the act must be a protest. Can you guys see my failing to pay a fine or paying the inspection fee and all that is clearly a protest, right? Cool. Check. Got that one? The act must be nonviolent. This act was completely rational. It was, there's no victim. Quite literally, there is not a victim in this other than the state. So, nonviolent, we got that. Check. The act must be conscientious. When the police officer got to the car on the second arrest, he goes, "I know you protest this, but..." Yep, they know. I've discussed it with just about every member of our police department, numerous occasions while we're at the polls, whatever. They go, "Why do you do it? Why are you just tempting us?" And I said, because if you want a result, you actually have to go and follow the process. And I've been saying for a couple of years, I'm going to go and put together a game plan that they can't beat. I've done my homework. The act must be public. Absolutely clear that this is a public act, right? So, and there's one last text. The act must be narrowly targeted to the law under protest. Those are the challenges. Interesting, isn't it? We've got every one. My first time going into court, what I didn't understand is I didn't have all the check boxes checked. So it didn't actually have an appeal that we could take to the Supreme Court. Because if we did, we would lose, we wouldn't get to go back again. You guys see how that works? Now, in a criminal trial, you go out and you have this idea, if you ask for a jury trial, you get a jury. And you have 12 people, and if you can convince one of them you're right, you're off. You all know that, right? You can actually make an argument to the jury why this law doesn't fit or a whole bunch of other things. It's called jury nullification. I'll get you some information if you're interested. It's great. New Hampshire actually passed a law that says that the lawyers can tell the jury that they can nullify the law if they choose. That was violated in Keene last year, right after we passed it, immediately by a judge who said, you must disregard that particular instruction. He said, I have to let him make it, but you can't do it. Wait a second. This is back before the legislature. But what you don't understand until you become part of the system is that they're always fighting. The administrative department wants their rules, they want their regulations, and they want their revenue. The lawmakers go out and try to construct stuff, and then the judges pick it apart and decide what is and what isn't right, fair, and reasonable. Did you guys all know that? Here's the scary part. There's a book. If you're curious about this stuff and you really want to make a difference, go and look up a book called 3 Felonies a Day. And that is how many felonies the average American actually commits on a daily basis without even knowing it. There are 14,000 pages of law in the state of New Hampshire. My 16-year-old daughter is expected to know every one of them about the road, travel, etc. Now, I'm not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree, but the 40 hours she spent in driver's ed probably didn't cover that much. But anytime they want to go and do something to you, they can find something. I was the advisor to the police department when I was a member of the Board of Selectmen. And they had a situation where they arrested a guy, and they didn't know what to charge him with. They arrested him. Funny, they got back to the police station, they went through everything, they looked at the evidence they had, and they found out he had an illegal prescription in his car that did not belong to him. They charged him with possession. That sucks, right? The prescription belonged to his dog. It was pet medicine. The police officer in charge, doesn't work for our department anymore, he was a bit of a too far over the top guy, went out and said, that'll teach him to be wise to me. He'll spend over $10,000 in legal fees staying out of jail. And he did. 2 exits down the highway from where we are today, a gentleman went out and wanted to properly secure his property. His name was Michael. Michael went out and put out video cameras so that he could make sure that if anything happened, he had evidence. Pretty good, right? You guys would all think that was a reasonable thing to do. How many of you guys think that's a felony? Not a single hand. Okay, great. Now we're on a roll. So the police, what's that?
I didn't hear. Video cameras where?
At his house, property, and posted saying everything is being recorded.
Gotcha.
The police show up and they start harassing his son about something. And he was a happy, happy guy. Because for the first time, he had proof. Can you imagine? Where's my videotape? Do you have my videotape? Oh, there it is. Okay. He had proof. And he took that proof to the police chief. Pretty good idea, right? Because here you go. I have the proof. They were harassing my son. They were treating him with disrespect. What do you guys think the answer was? They arrested him for felony wiretapping because the police did not consent to being recorded. Today, nowhere in the United States can you be arrested again for that because of something called the Glick decision. The Glick decision was whether or not the police could actually arrest someone for recording them. This has been a big issue all over the country. The Glick decision came out of Boston, but it had an interesting twist. The twist was that if they arrested you incorrectly and improperly, you could sue the government and the police officers as the city and personally. And that changes the game. The Ware Police Department in New Hampshire is considered to be one of the worst, or has been considered one of the worst abusers of this kind of stuff. If they don't like you, You probably shouldn't drive through Ware. Police chief in my community actually lives in Ware. He says, I don't want to get stopped by the Ware police. President of the Free State Project, Carla Garrick, gets stopped by the Ware police, records them, because that's what Free Staters do. They want to make sure that the law is followed. They're pretty reasonable. If you actually follow the law, they'll thank the police for it. But if you don't, they complain. It took her a couple years and some lawsuits. But remember that law firm I told you about? Martin Hipple, PLLC, New Hampshire Legal Services? They actually ran that case right up until the Ware Board of Selectmen had to deal with it. They had to spend money fighting with Martin and Hipple. The selectmen, or Martin and Hipple, Seth, cool guy, one of my best friends, called up the Board of Selectmen and said to them, hi, this really isn't worth the time and the trouble. Can we do something about this? They said, no. Sorry, we'll see what the court says. Can you imagine how much that would have really just pissed him off? Come on, you guys agree, maybe? They're not going to be reasonable? After the Glick decision, and the reality that the town and the police could be held liable, the Board of Selectmen called Attorney Hipple and said, hey, can we work something out? And the shoe was now on the other foot when Attorney Hipple asked his client, may I say back to them, we'll let the courts decide? The client happily said yes. You get it? All of a sudden, if you go and you get a judicial change, you can actually get the problems fixed. Remember I mentioned to you one juror a little while ago? You get one juror to say you're not guilty and you're good, right? Pretty good, you're off. Legal arguments are exactly the same in these cases. I need my 12 good legal arguments because I only need one of them to invalidate the law. Does that make sense? Laws are made to make sure that the public behaves as the state wants. That was not the intention. Civil disobedience is the oldest tradition in America. It was the defining moment at which we said to the British Crown, no more. And we threw a bunch of tea into the ocean, right down the street in Boston. And that's how we started. But never did I realize it until I was watching the trial of Hank Rearden. Did I actually put it in the context of what happens when you won't submit? Ayn Rand got it absolutely right. It's only when they can do something to you, when they can arrest you, when they can deny you of your property, when they can steal it, when they can put you in jail and take away your liberty. That is when they control you. What happens when you take on the persona of Hank Rearden and say, no more? You want my property? Come take it like any other thief. But I won't take your money. You guys remember that? Yeah? Why would he say, come take it? Simple. He figures it's money stolen from him anyway, right? Taxation without consent is forced. And yet, the risk for most people is too high. Why is it that most people can't afford to challenge this unless they have enormous conviction? They don't want to go to jail. It's inconvenient. It's expensive. It's uncomfortable. I decided that I could take the risk because I've made the argument everywhere else, and I could potentially actually change the law. You can too. If you go out and find things that you disagree with, you can look at the options and who is chasing judicial appeal. You'll find there are a lot of different groups. trying to do it in different ways. In New Hampshire, fighting the family courts is a really good example. The family court problems in New Hampshire are replicated in just about every state in the country. Some states, I'm told, are worse than others. Colorado, I'm told, is horrible. This happens to business people. The Atlas Society's Business Rights Center goes out and helps to fight through lawyers, through PR, and other stuff for laws that are actually being used to abuse business people and people who are friendly to, the rational definition of objectivism. If you haven't looked into the Business Rights Center, please do. It is a very, very worthy cause to send money to. The money goes to helping promote education on abuses, where people get caught in things like 3 felonies a day. There's a great book out there about a gentleman who got caught in backdating stock options. You read the book, what you'll find out is that he wasn't intentionally doing anything to hurt anyone. They'd made commitments to people, but they hadn't signed the paperwork. So they had to backdate them to when they were expected, but because the dates on the forms didn't match the dates over here, and a whole bunch of other arguments made by the government, he lost just about everything. The Business Rights Center helped make and bring that out to the awareness of people. When you make information like that available to people, then people can start asking questions of regulatory agencies as to whether or not this was the actual goal and objective. I'm going to tell you another little secret. How many of you have had a branch of the federal government doing something that you thought was wrong at some point or another? Raise your hands, come on. Oh, we got a couple. Do you know how to find out whether or not they are doing it right and get their attention? What if I told you in 2 phone calls and the proper request, you can get really good information? A congressional inquiry by a sitting congressman must be answered within 10 days. Did you know that? No, you didn't. My congressman is Frank Ginter. Called him up the other day. I said, can you check on this for me? I can't get any answers from a department, but guess what? They are required by law to answer the question within 10 days. It just so happens I stumbled across a PDF document on the on an Army military site that explained the procedure from the other side, what they have to comply with, why, and what the timelines are. How many of you guys think that would be interesting? Freedom of information. You start reading that and you go, oh, these guys get scared by X, Y, and Z. Let's go make X, Y, and Z happen. Because when we do, we use their force against them. I do not initiate force. With that said, do not be on the other side after you initiate force against me. Because I will find every resource available and decide whether or not it's prudent to use it. Arresting me, not such a good idea. I fought in New Hampshire against TSA abuses at the airport. It's one of the first things I did, first time I made CNN. I went out and said, if you are a TSA agent who goes over the line and someone feels sexually assaulted, a TSA agent could be charged with sexual assault and get put on the registered sex offender list. Some of you might have heard of that. Any of you heard of that? It was pretty cool. They took a poll on Channel 9, our local television station, about how popular this idea was. It was not popular, right? It was only like 92% in favor. We didn't get it. According to all the lawyers, we couldn't actually hold federal employees liable to state regulations on federal property. Damn lawyers. What we did get, however, is a requirement that any police officer, law enforcement officer in the state of New Hampshire has to take and accept a complaint about such a behavior. Those need to be recorded with the state, and a pattern of recurring behavior can easily be identified and tracked. Irony. About 2 years after we got that law in place and passed, somehow a TSA agent at the Manchester airport right up the street, that's where some of you may have flown into, got caught possession of child pornography actually at the airport in his locker. Is it possible that we have people that we don't want doing things that we don't like? Is some of this new information to you? I'm looking for an answer there. Yeah? Do you feel more empowered now to actually ask questions and to know your rights? The thing that I learned in government recently is that there is never a good time to offer a police officer information without a lawyer. And nothing you say will ever help you. Ever. You know why? Because they can't. I mean, they legally can't help you. So all it does is give them ammunition. When you get in trouble, they have to release all the information they have about you. Discovery. They have to give it all to you. Did you know that? If you didn't, it's something you should know. Most people don't know that you can actually challenge the system. But when you do it quietly, politely, with a plan that is properly executed. Under the New Hampshire Constitution, when I was a member of the legislative body, the New Hampshire Constitution says that I cannot be stopped, detained, harassed, or anything by anyone for any reason while I'm on legislative duties. Think of it as diplomatic immunity. Can you guys imagine diplomatic immunity in the United States? That's pretty cool, right? I got stopped by a police officer one day. 83, on my way to a vote at the State House. And he pulled me over and I said, I'm on my way to the State House. He goes, so? I said, you have to let me go. He says, no, I don't. We went through this little exchange. And he thought he was right, and he had a gun. He obviously was. I went to court. I have to go plea. So in New Hampshire, you have to go for a pretrial conference where they decide whether or not there's something you can work out. So the prosecutor says to me, we'll give you a $50 fine. You walk out, we're done. Remember those rational investments we were talking about earlier? How many of you guys would go out and spend over $1,000 in legal fees to save on a $50 fine? That's me. We challenged them. We brought the constitutional argument right to them, and they said to me, if you don't take this deal, we're going to throw the whole book at you. And I said, bring it on. And he was pissed. Like, these guys don't expect anyone to challenge them. Seth Hipple, Martin Hipple, PLC, wrote the legal argument, went out and found a precedent that said a police officer who lacks the ability to arrest, lacks the ability to cite or write a violation. A police officer went over into the border of Maine, tried to write someone a ticket. The argument went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, no, if you don't have the authority to arrest, you can't write a ticket. It's pretty cool. The Hampshire Constitution says I can't be arrested or detained. So they didn't have the ability to write me a ticket. Case dismissed. Now, should you use that? Well, if you're not a legislator, no. A legislator, no. But you know what? There may be some other exception. When you see how departments behave, what you will realize is government departments use the law against each other. They're constantly fighting with it. Your selectmen are going out and arguing with the Department of Revenue or the Department of this or that or whatever. Your job ought to be to tell everyone you know. Look for the way in which you can fight back. I'm sorry, I wanted to give you a warning. My first slide was a picture of the Matrix. And I wanted to warn you that after you actually knew this, there was no going back. Literally none. Because once you realize that you can make a challenge, you either have to say, I'm never going to do it, I'm going to accept the law as it exists, or you will start to question why, and whether or not the things they are doing to you are the appropriate things to do. Carla, president of the Free State Project, said to me 4.5 years ago or so, I think, what's the difference between a minarchist who is interested in limited government and an anarchist? She smiled and waited for an answer, and I said, I don't know. She said, 6 to 18 months. Once you start questioning why an authority, everything changes. Think about it. Once you drink the Kool-Aid, you question everything. Why? Do they have the ability? It's what I learned in government. Our job is to start questioning why we gave them that authority in the first place. And how do you get rid of it? Okay? Find common people who are interested in common things and see if there's something you don't like. Go get it changed. Okay? If not, think about whether or not you can change it yourself. And one last thought. In New Hampshire, the place with the toughest car inspection laws in the country, they say we need this. It is a requirement. The state would fall apart without it. You can imagine that, right? That's said by the Department of Safety and all the auto dealers and everyone who is in the legislature who owns a garage or makes money fixing cars. The only people who argue against it, by the way. Little background, 30 states in the United States of America have 0 car inspections. A number of others have every 2-year inspections. And 4 out of 5 studies say car inspections are just a racket that benefit the state for fines and auto dealers, but they do not improve safety. But the only study that our people at the Department of Safety and the Auto Dealers Association wanted to quote was the one from Pennsylvania that disagreed. Think about it. These guys don't tell you the truth because they're not required to. Find the truth, and it will give you power. I appreciate your time. We have a few minutes for questions. Am I right that it is?
Yep, thanks a lot. Can you come up to the mic? We do have a few minutes for some questions.
Please tell me again, when they came to your house that first time they arrested you, what was the charge? I'm not saying it was right, but what was the charge?
Failure to answer the charge of car inspection for the city of Bedford that I got at last year's Atlas Summit event.
Okay.
Irony of it, isn't it? Go ahead.
All right. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question for one of the members of the audience. Yes, of course it is you. Come up to the microphone.
Me?
No, my daughter, right behind you. We have this fictional character in my house whose name is Reffany Lambert. When there's this question where somebody doesn't want to get in trouble, my daughter comes up and says, I have this friend, Reffany Lambert.
My name is Stephanie, by the way, so.
Yes. So, I would like to ask the hypothetical Reffany Lambert what it was like to call the police to get them to help you and watch your parent be dragged away in handcuffs for the legitimate protest of a victimless crime. What kind of impression did that leave with you, or confidence in the police department or the law to do the right thing?
So it was my last option, so I couldn't think of anything else to do, but it was pretty sucky, I guess. Like, it wasn't my idea of a good Saturday morning.
Perfect. Did you have a better Sunday night?
No.
Why not?
Because we were dealing with the police again.
You were dealing with what? Move the microphone down. Let them hear you.
Because we had to deal with the police officers again.
What happened?
I was driving the car, and he was in the passenger seat. He had been arrested that morning. And they followed me into the driveway, and they turned on their lights, and they said, your car is unregistered. So,
Because they suspended my driver's license on Friday, after I got it restored on Wednesday, they suspended it on Friday. The notice hadn't hit my house yet. They threatened to arrest me in my own driveway for letting my daughter drive my car that I didn't know they'd suspended my registration on. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's pretty scary, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was 10 o'clock at night, so they woke up the whole neighborhood and everything. So, yeah.
You know why we got stopped? Because they could easily recognize the car. What are the 2 stickers on the back, Stephanie?
There's 2 porcupine stickers on the back.
Easily identifiable car. If you're going to challenge them, be prepared. I took out my cell phone, put it on speakerphone. I dialed my attorney. He's on speed dial. I have a lifetime retainer. I have to pay by the hour, but it's a discount rate. And I said, hi, Seth, what do I have to do? Can my daughter leave the car? We're in our own driveway, etc. She has to stay. You could go, though. So I got out of the car, and I walked over and watched them. They were infuriated. Do you know, they don't want you to leave the car. When we were done, one of them shoved me. Now, if I had done that while I was getting arrested, it'd be a charge of resisting arrest. If the underlying charge goes away, I'm still convicted of resisting arrest potential. You guys know that, right? Yeah, it's ugly. But you know what the penalty is for that guy who was harassing my daughter and threatening me? Promotion. I spent 45 minutes with the county attorney. His name is Dennis Hogan. Campaigned with him when he was running. And he said, well, really nothing we can do. You make a complaint to the police chief, they'll do an investigation, they'll put something in his file. And I said, thank you very much. Stephanie, did you feel intimidated?
Not intimidated, but I had gotten my license literally a week before, so they could easily revoke my license, which I had worked 4 months to get, so that was devastating in a way.
And once they saw it was my daughter, they decided to continue and escalate. I just thought you guys should know that. Because it's you, it's your friends, it's your family, it's your associates. Thank you. Anyone else have a question? Please. I do. I live at 3 Lidston Lane in Litchfield, New Hampshire. It is, but I actually represented both 1 and 2, so I actually have worked with Frank Ginter for a number of... And you're a rep yeah, except for we have a Democratic congressman in my district, right. So she doesn't represent me. I mean, she has never represented me. Go ahead.
Well, it's a terrific experience watching you talk, and that was the case last year as well.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if this is part of a campaign to keep libertarians from moving to New Hampshire?
Absolutely not. It is a campaign to make sure they feel inspired to come here because there's a way in which they can actually get respect. The Free State Project used to be started out as sort of a joke and a punchline. When I was running for office last year, many of the questionnaires I got asked me about my affiliation with the Free State Project. They asked every person running for office in the state. The AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, explicitly asked if I was affiliated with, a member of, or if I actually attended events with people from the Free State Project. You know what my answer was? Shredder. Anyway, thank you very much. Oh, and that means we shredded the questionnaire. It wasn't even worth answering. The president of the American Federation of Teachers says every time she hears me speak, the hair on the back of her neck stands up. And that's actually submitted testimony at a hearing in Concord. You can read the transcript. Thank you very much.
Quick final question. Yeah, because I've actually been a commissioner in my town, and we actually had to fire several police officers because we, for various and sundry reasons, because I was a commissioner and I thought my job was to protect the people. You know, and the police officer was supposed to protect the people, not to potentially endanger the people. So I'm curious about the local officials. The police can just say, we're just doing our job, you know, what are you going to do? But what about the local officials who back this?
I have a great answer for you. In the 2 months before I ran for selectman for the first time, there was an incident at the Litchfield fire station. Mr. Kahn will remember this. Apparently, some people broke into the fire station, trashed it, turned over a trash can, because the fire chief is really short. and put a little sign on the whiteboard that said, what was it, for little Napoleon. Yeah. So it was about, ultimately, we'll get to that. They put a little sign that says, for little Napoleon. A little jab at the fire chief, right? So the fire chief and the fire department's all upset. Volunteer fire department mostly, we got a couple full-time employees, but all volunteer. So they call the police, and the police come down to do an investigation. Here's what wasn't immediately obvious. The policeman who was doing the investigation already knew that it was the two police officers on the overnight crew. I spent 6 years as a selectman. And I knew last week when I called the chief of police and said, what will happen to the officer who harassed me if I file a complaint? His answer was the same as it was for that police and fire situation. You'll never know you're not entitled. The selectmen in the town of Litchfield will never know any bad behavior or bad acts by the police department because the New Hampshire Police Department has shielded itself from any investigation except by its own. And have you ever heard the expression, these guys bleed blue? The only people who can ever hold them accountable in this state is the local police department and police standards and training. We have no accountability to the people who police us.
Can the selectmen, or if they wanted to, could they say, we're hereby abolishing our police department, and we're going to reconstitute a new one that reports to, I used to be a police commissioner, that reports to me and to the fellow commissioners, and we can, you're our agents.
Ware tried it. When they were Ware, New Hampshire, looked at doing it. What they found out is mostly no. There was one thing they could do, which was to, in what we call a town meeting in New Hampshire, they could zero the line item for the police department, and once they do that, no money can be spent on that effort whatsoever in your community for the subsequent year. Once you actually make it so there's no money, they would have to go out and beg the state police and the sheriff's department to actually perform that role until a judge ordered it otherwise, or until they had another election which actually reversed the decision. That was the one course of action they came up with, and they chose not to try to execute that for fear that they might not have anyone to show up if there was a burglar at your house. How's it for an answer?
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. Actually, one of the local towns didn't have a police force for quite a while. What they did, didn't have a police force for quite a while. What they did, in fact, was contract out with some other police and said, you are contracted to patrol the streets this many hours a day, here are the conditions, we're in charge, and they did it, and it worked out well. They actually ended up getting a police department themselves. That reported to them, and as far as I know, it's going pretty well. But the point is, the police department reported to the mayor and the council, and that's the way it was.
George Lambert has turned civil disobedience into feisty art.